My name is Will Postma, and I'm delighted to be with you today to update you on the work of the Primate's World Relief and Development Fund. I first want to thank Reverend Corrine Snowden for the warm invitation to speak to you, the parishioners at Grace Church, Milton. It's wonderful to know that you've been watching our videos to learn more about our programs and partners. Some of you may be familiar with PWRDF's mission statement to work towards a truly just, healthy, and peaceful world. This phrase is derived from the words of the prophet Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. The prophet asked the Lord if the people should honor him with burnt offerings, calves, rams, olive oil, typical gifts and sacrifices of the day. But the Lord doesn't need all these things. The prophet Micah writes, the Lord requires us to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. This is one of my favorite pieces of scripture, not just because it's associated with PWRDF, but because it's such a simple instruction to act, love, and walk. 3 actions that guide us in our work as we respond to crises, share our abundance, and accompany others on a journey to wholeness. Today, I'm going to give you some examples of how we do this by telling you about our Indigenous programs in our response to Ukraine and other global emergencies. In January 2022, as the Omicron variant began to spread rapidly around the world, Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario and Northern Manitoba were particularly hard hit. Not only did many people get sick, but people were also affected by supply chain disruptions and lockdowns. Grocery store shelves were empty, and many people could not get their paychecks because people were just too sick. The situation became dire very, very quickly. PWRDF allocated a $15,000 emergency grant to get food and much-needed supplies to 2 First Nations communities in the spiritual ministry of Mishamakwish, Bearskin Lake, and Kingfisher Lake. Archdeacon Deborah Kraft of St. Paul's Church in Thunder Bay and her team of volunteers purchased food from a local grocery store, and a container truck was loaded up. After making the 18-hour drive along the ice road to Bearskin Lake, food and supplies were unloaded in the high school gym. And then, hearing what was needed in Kingfisher Lake, the diocese worked with a local businessman to purchase hygiene supplies and face masks and deliver them by charter plane to Kingfisher Lake. After Archdeacon Deborah watched the supplies get loaded onto the plane, she wrote, I am very grateful to PWRDF for providing $5,000 for the purchase of PPE and for paying for the Air Bravo charter, but also to Titus Semple of Semple Enterprises for donating an additional $6,000 worth of additional PPE. I have deep gratitude to PWRDF and the Algoma Diocese for making this essential support for our Indigenous brothers and sisters happen so quickly. PWRDF has been walking with Indigenous partners for almost 3 decades since the landmark apology to Indigenous communities from the Primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, Archbishop Michael Pearse. And since then, PWRDF has supported more than 25 Indigenous partners across Canada who have made a difference in their communities. We've supported projects that reclaim language and culture, which we know is so critical to one's sense of identity, and that we so grievously took away from our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We funded partners who provide much-needed capital and business support to entrepreneurs and small businesses looking to become self-sufficient and successful. We've supported a partnership between Indigenous midwives in Canada, Peru, and Mexico that promotes cross-cultural learning and the right to a cultural birth. In 2021, PWRDF began investing more resources to support reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada with a new grant for programs supporting community health, youth engagement, climate action, and safe water. This new program is called the Indigenous Responsive Programs Grant, and it is so named because we are allocating grants to partners who are telling us what they need, and we respond to their priorities. This work has already begun. The Diocese of Edmonton, working with Indigenous Birth of Alberta has received a grant to support Indigenous midwifery in Edmonton. Another organization, the Ganawake Cultural Center in Oka, Quebec, is funding Mohawk language and cultural reclamation. The Métis Nation of Ontario is restoring the connection between Indigenous food and farming practices to Indigenous culture and knowledge. And in downtown Winnipeg, an organization called One Just City will use $10,000 to fund an elder in residence and a harm reduction outreach worker. This will support community members who have experienced intergenerational trauma, who are survivors of residential or day schools, or who are coping with addiction. There's a real hunger for learning and understanding more about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people across Canada. Some of you may have read about or perhaps even participated in Mapping the Ground We Stand On, an interactive workshop that explores the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius. During the pandemic, we reimagined this workshop as a virtual gathering on Zoom and made use of the technology at hand. As churches begin to reopen, our mapping exercise is returning to real-life workshops, but others still want to use the Zoom version, so we're happy to offer both. You can book this workshop for your parish or community at pwrdf.org/mapping exercise. And finally, I'd like to tell you a bit about Ukraine relief and other humanitarian responses that we in PWRDF are supporting. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began on February 24, more than 6.5 million Ukrainians have been forced to leave their homes and find safety within Ukraine, and millions more have crossed the border to become refugees. Here's a snapshot of 2 international partners and 4 local partners and the work they are doing to help Ukrainians. The first is Hungarian Interchurch Aid, or HIA. PWRDF is a member of the ACT Alliance, a global faith-based coalition of more than 140 churches and related agencies working in humanitarian assistance, long-term development, and advocacy. HIA is also a member of the ACT Alliance. This allowed us to quickly provide much-needed funds. HIA is one of the largest charitable organizations in Hungary, but it also has had a permanent presence in Ukraine for more than 20 years. Hungarian Interchurch Aid is working closely with local governments and more than 20 local first responder groups in Ukraine. It's been shipping food and distributing other relief goods to internally displaced people who have not crossed into Hungary. With connections to the local authorities on both sides of the border, HIA is able to ship food and other essentials and life-saving medical equipment and supplies from Hungary into Ukraine. HIA has established 2 24-hour refugee support points, one in Hungary and one in Ukraine, and is providing safe transportation to railway hubs, food and hygiene kits for new arrivals. The second organization is HelpAge International. HelpAge supports vulnerable seniors globally and has assisted seniors living in eastern Ukraine since the Russian invasion in 2014. It has provided food, medical assistance, and sometimes even wheelbarrows of coal to help them heat their homes. And as a result, they were well positioned to provide assistance from the beginning of the war in 2022. Currently, HelpAge International is helping Ukrainians of all ages who have fled to Moldova, and where 1 in 4 Ukrainians fleeing are seniors. Because men between 18 and 60 are not able to leave the country, many elderly people are accompanying children and other family members. Because Ukraine has had a vibrant volunteer and civil society for years, there are many capable local organizations that have transitioned to supporting their fellow Ukrainians. PWRDF is making a concerted effort to partner with these organizations because we believe Ukrainians are best positioned to understand local needs. They are invested in helping their fellow citizens and rebuilding Ukraine once the war ends. So far, we have partnered with 4 Ukrainian organizations. Initiative E+ is one of them. It's based in Kyiv and was established in 2014 to help medics and first responders to provide relief to families impacted by the 2014 invasion. Over the last 2 years, they've supported hospitals and medical centers in treating COVID patients. When the invasion began at the end of February, they were able to ramp up their operations and partner with the Ministry of Health. And they are now providing tactical medical equipment such as tourniquets, dressings for serious wounds, and external braces and supports for broken bones. And these supplies are being delivered to hospitals, medical centers, and first responders in the cities that were subjected to the most serious attacks by Russian forces. PWRDF funds have also provided 2 much-needed ambulances. Our second local partner is a Ukrainian organization called Fight for Right. Established and led by Ukrainian women with disabilities, Fight for Right's core mission is promoting the rights of persons with disabilities in Ukraine. To date, the organization has already evacuated or assisted 645 people with disabilities, and with more than 2,000 additional evacuations requested. PWRDF is contributing by supporting a hotline launched with a focus on evacuation, medical supplies and support, assistive technologies, and durable equipment such as wheelchairs and hearing devices, financial support, as well as accommodations when needed in Ukraine and abroad. A third local partner is called Untitled Children's Rehabilitation Center, and it's based in Lviv, in western Ukraine. This organization has been providing physical rehabilitation services and social support for patients and their families since 1992. And since the war started in February, the city of Lviv has become a major hub for housing of internally displaced people and a transit point for Ukrainians leaving the country. The municipal government has been referring displaced families who have children with disabilities to Zerello. The center provides them with a place to stay, food, medications, and rehab services. The center's adapted bus is also able to take families to the Polish border. PWRDF funds will allow Zerello to upgrade the heating system in their facilities so that they can keep heating costs down and deliver their programs in a safe and comfortable building. And the most recent Ukrainian partner that we've supported, continue to support, is Voices of Children, an organization that is providing emergency psychological assistance to children and their families all over the country who've been affected by the war. PWRDF support will be used to launch mobile psychological supports for children and their parents in the Kyiv region, accessing the most vulnerable people in small, deoccupied cities and villages. PWRDF is grateful for donations to support Ukraine, where the needs are still so high. We are glad to be working with the ACT Alliance and with partners around the world who can respond quickly and effectively with food, with healthcare, with shelter, with post-trauma supports and other priority needs. And yet, as we focus our prayers and donations on Ukraine, we must be aware of the powerful ripple effect it is having on food security in countries where PWRDF partners are working. Ukraine, long known as the breadbasket of Europe, supplies a large amount of wheat to the World Food Program as it provides emergency food relief in countries hard hit by conflict and climate-related disasters. Outside of these food distribution programs, the economies of 18 African and least developed countries import as much as 50% of their wheat from Ukraine and Russia. We're already hearing from churches in East Africa about shortages and increasing food prices with wheat, as well as corn, barley, and sunflower oil, unable to be exported from in both countries. We must also not forget other global crises that continue, and to that end, in April, PWRDF allocated $360,000 from its own reserves, the same amount that was donated in the first 4 weeks of the war in Ukraine. Those funds were used to support people in 4 other countries where the needs grow more dire each day. More than 100,000 Rohingya are living in Rakhine State, Burma, confined to displacement camps, which have been called open-air prisons. There are severe limitations on movement, education, and health care. PWRDF will support the ongoing work of the Lutheran World Federation in Myanmar, bringing food, health care, and dignity to people now marginalized by the regime. The protracted humanitarian crisis in Iraq remains one of the most volatile in the world. Internally displaced people, refugees, returnees, and their host communities are the most vulnerable. PWRDF will support LWF in Iraq through an ACT appeal in its work to improve water, sanitation, and hygiene services, and to address sexual and gender-based violence with local community groups. While enduring conflict for 2 years, as well as COVID restrictions, people of Tigray and Ethiopia have been denied foreign aid and support. The funds that we are providing are supporting safe water, sanitation, and hygiene for those most vulnerable, especially those who've been displaced as they have sought safety. This support will build on past work of Lutheran World Federation, again through the ACT Alliance. As the war and displacement continues in Syria, PWRDF is also renewing and strengthening its support for the Middle East Council of Churches through the ACT Alliance appeal for Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The Middle East Council of Churches will use PWRDF funds to train Syrian women in Jordan to run small businesses or to become home care workers or nurse assistants. Your gifts are so important in working towards a truly just, healthy, and peaceful world. Please continue to keep the work of PWRDF and our partners in your prayers. Thank you.